to meet. I'm Dottie Summerfield Justy, and it is my pleasure to co-chair the Small Business Council with Patricia McKinney. I've been a longtime chamber volunteer. My company, Summerfield Associates, is a 30-year-old recruiting and consulting firm. I said, but like a lot of you, the day that I opened my business, I joined the chamber, and it has been a joy for me to participate in this and to help the Small Business Council come back to where we are today with incredible programming like we have now. Some of you have joined after we started chatting. And as you come in, if you don't mind, please put your name and your company either in the chat or change your name to your name and your company. Patricia, I'd like to welcome everybody. We have lots of attendees that are still coming in. I don't want to make us late because we have a jam-packed meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Patricia at the moment.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dottie, so much. We want to now thank our sponsor. This sponsor is really makes things roll, makes things work for us. So we need help with the Small Business Council programming, and the way that we can get that support is through our sponsor, Independent Bank. And here representing iBank is Jeff Kimbrough, who is Vice President and Branch Manager. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, Patricia. Thank you for having us again. We truly enjoy being a sponsor of these events. We're very grateful for everyone to join us today. I'm extremely excited to hear our panelists speak on the next normal. We all have had the need to make necessary adjustments in our day-to-day practices. Interesting enough, even in banking, we are experiencing a shift in practices. What would our next normal be? Will digital currency be prevalent in the upcoming years? I'm sure we all have heard of this corn shortage that we're experiencing. How long will this linger? Business development. I mean, I can go on and on about this, but most importantly, our world is shifting before our eyes. So the next normal, very interesting topic. Just as at Independent Bank, we are consistently finding innovative ways to be a resource to our clients that our clients can depend on. So again, I really want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And if any of us at Independent Bank can be a resource to you or your business, let's connect soon. We'd be interested in speaking with each and all of you. So give us the opportunity to serve you heroically, and thank you, and sit back and enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you very, very much. I would like at this time to thank our think tank. Most of you who have attended our sessions know that the brainchild behind the programming that you have seen all year long is because of a dedicated number of volunteers that we call our think tank. And without them, we wouldn't have a brain, and you wouldn't have such wonderful programming. And with us today is Jeff Kimbrough representing iBank, both Whitney Joe and Michael Detroit representing Playhouse on the Square, Judy Bell, a longtime volunteer with the Small Business Council and a past co-chair of the Small Business Council. And one of our speakers today, Brad Federman, are representing our think tank today. And thank you all for your time and your commitment to the Small Business Council. When we were chatting, as we were coming in, we were talking about some really exciting news for our city. And Amy Daniels, I'd like to turn it over to you for just a quick update on this, what's
Well, first and foremost, let me just thank the two ladies that always appear on the screen with all of you. Patricia McKinney on our team is amazing and a rock star. And if you need anything chamber related, she is your go-to woman. And then Dottie Summerfield Justy, my God, like, what would we do without her and her leadership? Remember, she's in a volunteer role, and I know that some of her time has impacted her probably getting some business done. So we are so very grateful. And then obviously just so grateful for Independent Bank such a long history of sponsorship with the Small Business Council. So grateful for that. We did have exciting news today that will impact all of us at some point, one way or the other. If you were not able to tune in today on Facebook Live or YouTube, Ford Motor Company announced their presence back in West Tennessee. I have a couple of things to share with you, so forgive me for referring to my notes, but I want to make sure we get it right. The Greater Memphis Chamber and our local state economic development partners welcomed Ford Motor Company back to West Tennessee as it announced plans to build an electric vehicle and battery manufacturing plant at the Memphis Regional Megasite. And that megasite is located in between Memphis and Jackson, Tennessee. Ford and its partner, SK Innovation, are expected to begin construction in January and open the plant by 2024, bringing 6,000 new jobs and $5.6 billion investment to West Tennessee. Ford's investment marks the single largest investment in Tennessee's history and puts Greater Memphis and West Tennessee at the forefront of the latest developments in electric vehicle innovation. Today, the Ford president said that indeed this was their largest investment in North America ever in the history of Ford. So here's some real quick fun facts for you. The Detroit-Memphis connection. Detroit has Motown, Memphis has Stax. Memphis birthed the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, but Detroit raised her. Detroit owns the road with Ford, and we own the air with FedEx. Back in 1913, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Ford produced wooden wheels and the wooden body foundations for Model T Fords right here in Memphis. With this new plant, they will premiere eco-friendly carbon neutral manufacturing, the gold standard for the industry. And 108 years later, here in Memphis, Tennessee, Ford will be pioneering new technology and elevating standards for the automotive industry. Some say the entrepreneurial spirit runs in our water, and this group on the line right now knows that better than anyone else. And that same spirit runs through Ford and its founding fathers. The connections are palpable, these connections are powerful, and we are so excited at the Greater Memphis Chamber that Ford found its way back home to West Tennessee. And we will keep you all posted, and let's hope that we're all in person for an amazing grand opening later on down the road. With that, Dottie and Patricia, I will turn off my camera and I will see you guys later. I'll stick around, and I hope everyone has a great session.
Wow. Thank you, Amy. That is incredibly exciting news for the city, for our workforce, and for all of us. It's just amazing. And now it's my second great pleasure to introduce Tom Sullivan. Tom is the VP of Small Business Policy, or actually, as Beverly Robertson calls him, our U.S. Chamber such and such. Tom has been to Memphis to speak to the Small Business Council before. And Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. We welcome you, and I'd love for you just to kind of give us a few minutes of your time and your knowledge about what's going on in the world.
Well, thank you, Dottie. And boy, tough act to follow when Amy announces Ford coming home and employing 6,000 Memphians. That really, really amazing. And it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You know, the ripple effect in the small business community whenever Ford makes this type of commitment is really tremendous. And I know that even before today's announcement, there are a ton of entrepreneurs' minds spinning about how they can take part in this really fantastic development. I wanted to just do really three things. First is to just touch on where we've been. Second, to touch on where we are now. And then third, leave you with some resources. So where we've been, and this is primarily a thank you, Dottie, to Beverly and the whole Greater Memphis Chamber team, because what very few folks have realized is that the amount of resources that have been devoted to help small business, and we look at that roughly being over $1 trillion in SBA programs specifically pushed at helping small business. That was due largely because of the effort of local, state, regional, and national chambers of commerce. Again, sometimes overlooked in kind of the bad news of the day. The good news was that in 2020, 7 laws were passed with almost unanimous approval in a bipartisan way, specifically designed to help small business. And this was an all of chamber effort. And so we have the local chambers and the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce in particular to thank, to kind of bring that type of grassroots movement to make these types of bipartisan laws happen. They created what my mom now calls is my middle name, PPP. I created the PPP loans and certainly have enhanced SBA's disaster program. So that's what has happened, and the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce and iBank for making loans available to small business and other banks certainly deserve a ton of credit. Now, what's happening now? Now, there's still work to be done. We're working with SBA to improve the efficiency of PPP forgiveness, as well as make continual improvements in how they're implementing new disaster loans. Some small businesses may have seen that they've upped the limit. So if you were capped at $150,000 for an SBA disaster loan, you now may be eligible to go up to $500,000 at the same types of terms. And we're trying to help SBA in its struggle, quite frankly, to be more customer service friendly. We survey small businesses once a quarter, and earlier this month, the MetLife and U.S. Chamber of Commerce Small Business Index indicated a pause. It's really as simple as that. What we have seen over the past year is a slow but steady trajectory upwards. In the last quarter, we saw a pause. So there's no longer that trajectory upwards, although hope springs eternal, especially for small businesses. And so I don't mean to say that it's a downward trend, it's just a pause. And I don't think it's any surprise, Dottie, to any of your colleagues here about the reasons for the pause. You can't find workers, inflationary concerns, supply chain challenges. Those 3 things that all fall under kind of a rise in fear of Delta variant spikes are all contributing to the pause. We think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but unfortunately that light has been pushed a little bit further away than we originally hoped. So that's where we are right now, and that's backed up through our survey work in the field. Last but not least, before I hand it back over to Patricia, resources. We have a small business digital portal that we want to be helpful to the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce members and small businesses all across the country. It's called CO. The website is growwithco.com, kind of catchy. The value of this small business digital portal is useful tools, tips, and information, not just coming from a Chamber of Commerce, which Dottie, as you know, is always helpful, but coming from the voices and the narratives of small business peers. And because of that peer network and advice, getting greater acknowledgement and appreciation of that advice, and reviewing this small business digital portal really as a way to get the latest information, helpful information to small businesses. Again, the URL is growwithco.com. And we're certainly hopeful that this is another tool that is able to help small businesses throughout the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce. So Dottie, thank you for letting me spend just a few minutes. I'm gonna listen in because this is a chance for me to learn from great Memphians, and I'll turn it back over to Patricia.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks, Tom, for that valuable information. Growwithco.com. That's awesome. So hopefully everybody will visit that website. So now our panelists, they'll focus on the next normal when it comes to technology, HR, communications, and entrepreneurship. So we have Joseph Cutrell, Director of Strategy and Innovation with AT&T, Brad Federman, CEO of PerformancePoint, LLC, Beth Wilson, Founder and Chief PR Officer with Wilson Public Relations, and Michael Hoffmeyer, Director of the Cruz Center for Entrepreneurship. Panelists, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Patricia. I'm going to kick it off here at the top and talk about technology for the next 15 minutes or so. We're setting this up on purpose. First, this is a bit of a driver, if you will. So keep that in mind as we go through some of this. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about the trends that we've seen during this pandemic time, the things that are leading up. What are we seeing? I'm going to get into some of the issues moving forward, what's new, those kinds of things, and then probably focus most time on the third point here, which is just the information technology strategy. I've been working within healthcare for the last 3 years at AT&T, but I also have experience working with lots of other customers and companies throughout the history of my journey through technology here. So next slide, please, Lisa. Here's what we saw at AT&T. If we look back over the last year and a half, the pandemic changed the network traffic patterns, and that's important for how are we going to connect up at some point down the road. Our core network traffic spiked up 20%, which 20% is not a huge number, but we see a third of the internet, like over 400 petabytes on an average day, and that jumped up 20%. Mobile voice minutes went up, peak text rates went up, and these drew a picture of how things changed when people communicated. There was a lot more communicating from the home, from our mobile devices, and frankly, more voice communications on a network that had seen voice communications start to ramp down in favor of just digital IP-based traffic, computer-to-computer kinds of data communications. On our wireless network, we saw just those wireless text messages go up 46%. That's almost half again what it was prior to the pandemic. And as you see, the wireless minutes went up as well. Something even bigger than that, though, that we noticed on the network was that audio, video, and web conferencing went up 400%. That kind of makes sense. That's what we're doing here today. We're meeting over Zoom. A lot of that happened. And sometimes these innovations, or at least these changes in practices, take it takes feasibility, right? It has to make sense to do. It takes practicality, but sometimes it takes an external event, or in some cases, patience, for those things to actually catch on. So the thing we're doing right now on this remote meeting is something that was possible, it was practical, it was feasible, but it just didn't happen quite as much as it started to happen of March 2020. I think we're all familiar with that. One of the other things that really jumped up on our network was network-based IP remote access VPN, and that's a technical mouthful, but that's essentially companies and corporations bringing up remote sites and remote work locations, whether that's a pop-up tent or whether that's at somebody's residence, bringing that up to bring it into their dedicated network. That's typically something you would see with larger corporations that have a dedicated network, but as we'll talk about a little bit later, this remote access is something that we're going to need to get used to down the road. As this happened, not only was there a lot of work from home, there's a lot of work from anywhere now. And that's made possible through our new mobile networks. But some of these implementations were a little bit clumsy. Next slide, please. On our journey from clumsy to elegant, we're starting to help companies come up with a strategy on how to move forward, knowing that things like surge planning are not going to go away. It needs to be a part of everybody's business now. One of the big things that cause this future world to be very important is security too. As we put all of this data and important video on the network, then we have to make sure that it's very secure. And we do that by putting in some protections for things like ransomware and denial of service attacks. Both of those were up over 300% last year. And you may know, like, the Colonial Pipeline breach was a weakness in their VPN access. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do about this? We do know that there are certain areas of focus, and I wanted to take a long list of IT categories and reduce them down into 4 important points. You're going to see a lot of cloud happening within your business, and as you move services that you used to do on-prem to a cloud service, that's something that's now practical and feasible. You have to keep security in mind as you do that. Your connections are going to be internet-based moving forward. So as you bring in your internet connections, there are also security add-ons and bundles that my company does whenever you acquire those types of services. You're going to see 2 ways to connect, and AT&T, we call that fiber and mobility. So there will be in-ground connections. Those are using fiber. The good thing about fiber is it provides that symmetrical uplink and downlink data rate. We're sending a lot more traffic out of our remote locations than we did prior to the pandemic. And that used to be asymmetrical. People used to pull data down, but they didn't used to send a lot of data up. As you see these requirements for mobility and fiber start to come in, make sure that you're also looking at the devices, and smartphones, tablets, and sensors are going to become a way of doing business. And sensors will also include wearables in many cases, whether it's for internal use or connecting to your customers. And remote operations is going to be very important as well, because there are going to be fewer people coming into your location to support your IT infrastructure. So by making them cloud-based or allowing secure remote connectivity, you also will be able to allow for these remote operations and this remote support model that we're going to see moving forward in the next normal. That's the last slide I've got. Next slide, please. I'd like to turn it over to Brad from PerformancePoint to take it over from here. Thanks.
All right, let's go to the next slide then. All right, we're talking about people, and the technology changes that are occurring are really impacting people a great deal. So I've created a series of trends that you're going to see and experience that I'm going to talk to. And if you want more detail on any of these, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you find more information on any of them. The first thing I want to talk about is that the world has changed a great deal and is going to continue to change. And one of the things that technology has done is it's created a much faster pace of work without any boundaries. People have devices with them on vacation. They have devices with them when they sleep at night. And so what that's done is it's created no boundaries, no breaks. On top of it, you have money changing boundaries, borders faster than ever. You've got information moving faster than ever, some of which is not accurate. And that's created a lot of instability in the world, both politically, economically, and that will continue. And so that's created an anxiety level in this country and around the globe that's significant. And so you'll see how that plays out in the workplace. So let's go to the next slide and talk about that in specifics. First thing is we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I call it a healthy fear of falling behind. You know, the reality is in the next 10 years, we are going to experience what is about 100 years worth of change. You know, you're seeing it already. They just are testing now, Dallas to Houston. They're going to use, and Houston to Dallas, they're going to use self-driving trucks. That is a test that will take over the country long-term. You're seeing things like the fact that you're going to probably sit on a board, and one of the board members will be an artificial intelligence being that you're going to interact with and utilize. You know, this is how it's shifted. Think about this. The first rudimentary boats that were created and used were around 4,000 BCE. It took another 500 years before the wheel was actually created and utilized. But between the first flight and the moon landing, it was only 66 years. That is exponentially getting smaller, and we're creating more change because the technology is driving more change along the way. So you guys just got to imagine that is a difficult thing for people to deal with. There's massive demographic shifts in this country and outside of this country. You're going to have more Bitcoins, more cryptocurrency than countries. You have more computers than brains. It is a significant shift for a lot of folks. And in fact, you're going to see a shift away from West to the East. And so our power structure that we're used to, and economic structure we're used to, is going to see many changes. Go to the next slide. What that means is all the norms and ground rules are disappearing. And so we're going to have to recreate a sense of normalcy when you have very little stability and a lot of shifting. You know, right now, about 71% of organizational change efforts fail, and that will actually increase and go up. We're not built for change. We are built for comfort. We seek comfort. And that's one of the shifts we're going to have to make. We have spent time focusing on organizational change as if it's an organizational issue. But every organizational change that exists or has happened is really a series of individual changes that people make, and the sum becomes the organizational change. The reason it fails is because we never get the buy-in and the capability of the people that work for us to make that shift. Our change management efforts are now going to have to shift into a change management effort that's about helping people see how change affects them, helping them adapt and adopt the change and go through a change process. It's a lot more coaching, takes a lot more time, slower will end up being faster. And it's a big cultural shift that organizations are going to have to make. Let's go to the next slide. Emotional intelligence, huge skill that's important. It really is about the blending of emotions and data to make the most optimal decisions, traditional data and emotional data to make the most optimal decisions. It's always been important. It was started and created because people asked the question, why do really smart people do dumb things? In fact, one of the things that prompted this research, for many of you that may not know, is there was a candidate for president named Gary Hart. And he was a shoo-in for presidency. He never became president because he challenged the press to prove that he was having an affair. And they took him up on that challenge and got pictures of him on the deck of his boat with a woman who was not his wife that was sitting in his lap, and they were cuddling together and having a very romantic time. And he ended up losing the presidency because of that. Back in those days, that was a big deal. My point being is, they wanted to know, why would somebody that smart, because he was super smart, make that kind of a dumb mistake? And what they found out was there is smart, like intellectual smart, IQ, and then there is emotional smart, meaning, do I understand the emotions that I'm feeling, the emotions other people are feeling, and do I utilize those to make optimal decisions? And that's only going to become more paramount as we go forward with all of the change and all of the anxiety. People that are able to recognize their own emotions and manage them will do better. You know, think about this. 77% of Americans have stress levels that they say affect their health. 34% spike in anti-anxiety drugs last year from this year from last year. And a 14.8% spike this year from last year on prescription sleep medication. I'm going to add to it. 84% of flight attendants say they've dealt with unruly passengers in the last year. Most of those dealing with physical incidents. They've gone to Capitol Hill to testify so they can stop the skies from being so dangerous. All right, you've got 3,600 complaints of unruly passengers that were given to the FAA in the last year. It's not even over yet. We will more than double the complaints from the year before. What we're seeing is a test of our emotional intelligence. This last year and a half has shown us that we as a society need to build stronger resilience and emotional intelligence. Otherwise, we will break down, and you'll see things like that happening. People picking fights with Costco employees because they're being asked to wear a mask. Restaurants in Memphis that can open that haven't because they'd rather do curbside and drive-through instead of dealing with the public. We have to up our game when it comes to emotional intelligence of our communities. That starts right in the workplace. That is a key thing. We need to help our people figure that out. Let's go to the next slide. Here's one of the reasons why that becomes even more important. Because change is happening faster and there's exponentially more change, organizations are going to have to shift their structures faster than ever. Think about it this way. They're going to look more like an accordion that will expand and contract in multiple directions consistently throughout, time, which means we might need 30 people for a project this month, and 6 months later, they may be gone. And we'll need a different group with a different skill set for another year. and then they'll be gone. What that means is that our needs will change fast and furious. Gigs will become the norm. It's going to be about cost efficiency. It's going to be about cost, about efficiency, and about the right skill set are going to be key. And that's what organizations are going to care about. That's going to prompt even more changes. So if you go to the next screen, it's going to cause employees to say, well, if we have to have gigs and we're not going to have consistent employment, then I have to be my own agent. It's going to much resemble things like the entertainment industry. A gig mentality will really create this reaction. Employees are going to start to respond in kind, and they will see themselves as talent to be marketed, to negotiate, much like the entertainment industry. They will act as their own agent, and in some cases, they will have representation. What's really going to complicate the shift that the employer is making and employees will make over time is that our laws are not set up for this. They're set up for full-time workers, part-time workers, not independent contractors. We are moving into a place where people will be using independent contractors for what the government considers to be real jobs. And the problem with that is it's because our system is built on 1930s to 1970s laws, regulations, and it is not up to date. We need to change the tests for what an employee is and how it works so that employers aren't hamstrung and employees have a different definition they can work off of and other protections that make sense for them in this day and age. Big shift. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. The next slide is about career development being the new loyalty. Huge shift to change. People say that employees don't have loyalty. I would argue that that is completely bogus. Their concept of loyalty has changed. They know they have 50 years they have to work. If you get out of college today, you have 50 years you have to work and bring in income. And that's because we have to be able to retire and afford retirement, which is getting harder and harder and more difficult. They've seen wages stagnate. They've seen jobs simplified, jobs removed because of automation. They know the game. They understand that they have seen uncles, aunts, friends, parents lose jobs at 48, thinking that they were so skilled, to only be told, you don't have a good skill set, it's gone stale, and you're too expensive. I can hire somebody with a better skill set who's younger. And so the reality is they are thinking long-term. My skills have to be sharpened. Employers have to look at this from the standpoint of an employee. It's about longevity, it's about a marathon, and they'll have even more pressure because in a gig mentality and a gig workplace, they're going to have breaks in their employment. That means their skill sets are more paramount than ever, and they will be looking for companies that will grow their skill set. They will stay with them longer, and they'll have more opportunity in those companies and in other companies if they have a diverse, strong skill set, because they can switch from one project to a next, which means they can make 6 months last into 2 years, which will be prime for them going forward. So companies that encourage employee growth, companies that grow their employees will see longer retention and better use of skill set than those that don't. This will be a game changer moving forward for organizations if they want to succeed. It will be one of those things that if you do not grow your people, you will lose your people. And I know people worry about the risk of investing, but I'm telling you, you don't have a choice. You've got to invest in your folks. Next slide. Purpose and meaning are fundamental. Gosh, we've got the great reshuffle, the great resignation, the turnover tsunami. Let's talk about that. 95% of people are considering a change, according to Monster. Microsoft says it's 41% globally. Regardless of the amount, it is a significant number, and we've all felt it and seen it. It's a seismic shift, right? It's because we have had a catalyst, a moment, a watershed moment in our history that we really need to put into context. People talk about COVID. It wasn't just COVID. We have had 3 major shifts happen in 1 to 2 years. First, we had a health pandemic, COVID, which was reminiscent of 1918, the last pandemic of some kind of size like this, okay? Huge. The second thing we had a major economic calamity, all right? Reminiscent of the Great Depression, right, in 1 year. And the third thing we had was racial strife, reminiscent of 1968. We've had 1918, right, 1939, and 1968 all shoved into 1 year. That's huge. What that means is this last year and a half has really shaped us as people. It's made us think about who we are, right? And so work is no longer about a paycheck. Work is about much more. First thing first, it's about values, it's about meaning, it's about being an expression of who I am. The majority of people who are quitting today are quitting because they want meaning in their life. If you have not tapped into that, you are losing a battle. Why do you exist? How do you benefit the broader community? Why should I come work for you versus someone else? Those have to be questions you have to answer. Second one is burnout. We have to focus on trimming work-life conflict, not increasing it. People are quitting because they want to work to live, not live to work. And we need to change our models and mindsets in reference to that. They're quitting because of health concerns, which we have to find ways to make people feel comfortable, childcare issues in COVID, and lifestyle. They've moved, they've shifted to other places. They don't want to go back. They want to work where they live, and they want to live where they dream to live. And so recruiting is going to take a different kind of shape and form. It's not going to be about location. It's going to be about talent. That's a huge, huge shift. We just did a turnover study, and what we found was most people were willing to take pay cuts if they felt like they were being treated equitably and fairly, and if you help them maintain a balance between life and work. The game has changed, and we need to recognize that. Let's go to the next slide. Trim work-life balance. 83% of US workers suffer from work-related stress. US businesses lose $300 billion yearly as a result of workplace stress. Can't talk this morning. 57% of those that are stressed out are paralyzed by their stress. That means they are not functioning, they're not working. They say they're checked out. 51% say they're checked out, and 49% say they have to use the retirement money now, prior retirement, in order to survive. The stress-related concerns of your employees are huge. Our job has to be to reduce that stress. We have to listen to them throughout the year, not once a year, not once every couple of years, but throughout the year, and we need to adapt as we go. That might mean to make a change in our health plans that better our employees before the next enrollment, right? We have to follow their stress and address their stresses throughout the year. We're going to have to become very flexible. We're going to have to work on wellness, and we're going to have to follow their issues and concerns when it comes to money and help them through that. You're going to see a lot more organizations teaching people how to save money, how to make their money work for them. And we really need to focus on those kinds of things. One of the things that you're going to see is you're going to see a real shift in terms of benefits. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to see a shift in benefits about hyper-personalization. Having 3 large buckets of benefits or a set of holidays or whatever it is isn't going to make it anymore. We're going to have to create almost an a la carte menu for employees where they pick the benefits that they value and they need for a certain amount of money, because you've got 5 generations in the workplace with very different needs and concerns and different lifestyles, living in different places. There's no way that the traditional benefit approach works anymore. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to find benefits that are cost effective, that really help employees. So if you have a lot of employees that are having kids that are going to enter college, one of the things that I'm suggesting is that you work with organizations that help kids determine what college is best for them, help them find money, scholarships, help them understand what kind of college they can afford so that they can make decisions that don't put their parents and themselves in debt. Next slide. And it's the last slide. The hierarchy is dead. Okay. I'm going to repeat that. The hierarchy is dead. I talked about technology being the driver. Technology has caused us to flatten the organization, develop networks for people to look for expertise, to search out where knowledge is and not go up and down a ladder. They're looking for efficiencies. They're removing barriers. The ladder is a barrier to speed. In order to succeed in this environment, organizations have to move fast and furious. If you take the safe route, if it's the protective route, if it's about seeing what other people are doing, if it's about being second, third, or fourth, if it is about playing it safe, you will fall behind. One of the neat things that's going on now is the playing field's leveled. Top companies can drop to the bottom quickly, and small companies can rise to the top very quickly because the change is so fast and so much. If you pick right, it changes the entire landscape. So the reality is we have to get fast with change, remove barriers, and recognize that we cannot use old tools that were about control. We've got to create new vehicles that promote and facilitate speed. That's the new name of the game. That's where we have to go with our organizations. That's where we have to go with our employees. And yes, Michael, I'm happy to expound on that issue of employee leasing later, but I want to make sure that I give my other panelists time. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, well, today we're going to be talking about communication and the next normal. So we can go ahead and get started. There you go. Okay, so just real quick, what I'm going to be covering today is talking about, just what we're seeing right now, as well as the post-pandemic models of communication, speaking in the next normal, adapting to the next normal, and then listening in the next normal as well. Next slide, please. So over the last year, consumers have craved, and I think this speaks for every single industry and every single person in every single role. Consumers have craved authenticity. We're physically attached to our devices and our computers. We're scrolling, we're bypassing information, but we're also consuming an insane amount of content as well. And so if what we're posting or if what we're sharing is inauthentic in any way, consumers are going to move on without looking back. Employees needed reassurance and as much stability as possible over the last year. The Corona coaster was real. People, were going through in their minds and in my head, am I going to keep my job? Am I going to keep my clients? How long will I be working from home? Is it safe to go back to the office? When are things going to return to normal? What is normal? And then businesses, of course, were doing their best and showed remarkable resourcefulness, but they also wish that they were more prepared in a lot of ways. Now they want to take that opportunity to prepare. Next slide. So thinking through the post-pandemic models of communication and what do those look like? What does that really mean? And it starts with being intentional and being outcome oriented with both our tone and with our language choices. So thinking through, ways in which we address people, the way the verbiage that we use, not only verbally, obviously we've got a little bit of Zoom fatigue going on, but also through our email etiquette as well. And so that's something that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. And creating consistency. So, thinking through fireside chats, but the reliability and the reassurance of those types of communication. I was actually just in Nashville last week at a conference, and we had one of those fireside chats, and it was, of course, that's different. That was not an internal thing, but that was something industry-wide that we were able to gather in a more intimate setting and really have a real genuine conversation. And it was so, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, but it was so nice to talk to other people who are experiencing the same things that we're experiencing, or going through the same types of things, and talking through not only challenges, but what's worked for them in terms of solutions, and sharing that information and offering that reassurance that, you know, we're all kind of maybe not in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. Employees and the public still need consistent updates and check-ins because the times are still unsettled, you know, and thinking through you know, what's happening in a professional sense, what's happening personally as well. So when people are going through different things, both personally and professionally. So just thinking through what, you know, how you can check in better, especially from an employee standpoint, think through skip level meetings and those types of things to make sure that we are addressing needs as they arise and not, you know, after it becomes too late. And unmasking communications, you know, not obviously, you know, more than just taking off your actual mask, but also, you know, whether in person or virtual, every interaction should have a goal of building a connection and leaving both parties feeling satisfied, secured, and uplifted. And then listening more closely. You know, we can't forget the importance of listening and building a two-way dialogue in any communication that we have. And, you know, whether that is in person, whether that's through some sort of hybrid model, or whether that's just virtually, we've got to make sure that, you know, we are building that two-way communication with both, you know, all of our different target audiences. Next slide. So thinking through this spheres of communication, you know, starting with internal. So how do we see ourselves and how do we interact with one another? Thinking through going back to the office, company expectations, employee growth and development, which Brad just talked about, employee concerns. So thinking through, you know, just stress, physical illness, mental illness, you know, these types of things that were once taboo, making sure that they're open and brought to the forefront, and we're talking about them, making sure that people are okay. You know, what's happened over the last year and a half is not okay. And so, you know, checking on your people and making sure that they're okay, but checking on your customers too, making sure that they're okay. And then health policies, thinking through vaccine mandates, how are we going to communicate those? Not only internally, we see what's happening, you know, in a public sense, and we see what's happening, you know, and coming down from OSHA and things like that. But then how does that translate into our business? What type of communication should you have internally? Should there be cascading communication where you're talking to, you know, the leadership team, you're talking to your, managers, your employees? What does that look like? What types of communication materials do you need to draft and submit to make sure that everyone is on the same page? And then externally, companies, thinking through your company branding and your reputation, making sure that you're staying, you know, top of mind, and you're being mindful of what's happening externally, not just within your organization or just within the industry. Thinking through customer concerns and their inquiries. What are you hearing? What are people looking to you for? We've heard this word so much, but should we pivot our business model, or the way in which we communicate with our customers to make sure that we're addressing their needs in their most appropriate way? Thinking through social media, the type of content that you're sharing. Is it just 100% self-serving? Do we need to start adding some more industry insights in there? You know, make sure that people are coming to you to be the expert resource on whatever it is that's happening. You know, that goes into traditional media engagement too, and making sure that, you know, you're pushing out content that showcases your company as a thought leader, but also that you're being mindful and respectful to the different sensitivities that are happening, you know, at any day and time, but specifically in this climate of continued political turmoil, you know, social justice issues, and then of course, the pandemic and the physical and mental issues that have you know, really taken hold because of that. Next slide. So thinking through speaking in the next normal. Next slide. So 55% of our communication is shown through our facial expressions. This could not be more true where, even right now, I'm looking at, I'm trying not to look at myself talking, but so in some ways that does help to see what, how am I being presented on screen? What does my facial expression show? Does it show that I'm happy? Does it show that I'm sad? Does it show that I'm angry? Some people have just a natural reaction. And so just thinking through our facial expressions on the next slide, it's interesting to see some of the statistics around that. So in one study that was now 41 years or 40 years ago, 7% of messages pertaining to feelings and attitudes is in words spoken. 38% is paralinguistic, or the way in which words are said. 55% is in facial expression. So these findings increase the amount of work we have to do to get a message and its intention across, especially in a hybrid and virtual environment. So think through, going back to that cascading communication piece, should you have materials sent in advance, having presentation up on screen, thinking through the type of content that you're sharing with others and making sure that you are giving people information and presenting it in a way that they learn best. And the thank you example. So think through how even the phrase thank you can be anywhere from enthusiastic, polite, perfunctory, or disappointed, and even frustrated. So whether it's just, a thanks period, or thank you exclamation point, think through the tone in which you're using, and make sure to say that, just thanking people for their time is a very simple gesture, and it can go a long way. Nonverbal communication also means a lot. So just thinking through those cues as well. And then, so adapting business communication as virtual becomes the norm. It was kind of leading toward that, especially, think about the academic sector, especially at a school like University of Memphis. It certainly was, those hybrid classes, completely online classes were certainly increasing. And as people were wanting and requesting more flexibility, that did become, more of the norm. And now in this world that we are in, we know that it does work to be working in a virtual environment. Although we do crave and we miss the in-person collaboration, when we think about virtual becoming the norm, strategies and tools for communication need to adapt with it. So in some ways, a hybrid approach will make this easier, but in some cases, it might make it more complicated. In 2020, there was a Gartner study that showed 74% of CFOs plan to switch to at least some of their employees to remote permanently. And of course that, I would imagine that's even more true in this year, if not completely virtual, at least some sort of hybrid model. Better communication is a continuous process. So it takes small steps, not huge leaps. And so you want to, again, pull your employees, think through what it is that resonates with them in terms of communication. How do they best learn? How do they best absorb information? And think through that from an external perspective as well. Who are your stakeholders? How what types of messages do they resonate with, and on what channels, and through what modes of communication, and adapt based on that. Next slide. So expert insights. I wanted to share just a couple of things that we're seeing out there right now. There's a podcast called How the New Normal is Changing Brand Communications. It was last year. So obviously emotions ran high during COVID, thinking through anxiety, fear, and sadness, to anxious, people were seeking to regain control. Again, that going through that Corona coaster, and things started to seemingly get better toward the not really the end of last year, because that was I guess when cases were at their highest, but then toward the spring of this year, everything started to relax a little bit, and then we saw the Delta variant arise, and then everything kind of shut back down. And so our emotions were just, and thinking through, children. I saw this. I saw a graphic that was posted. It was going around social media yesterday, and it said the last normal year, if you're a seventh grader, was when they were in fourth grade. And, then they went backward from there. And so that was just really interesting, and thinking through, seeking to regain control, that really kind of spoke to me as well. And thinking through, what teachers have experienced and what we have experienced as business owners and leaders, and, wanting to make sure that we have control of our business, but also trying to understand that our clients are feeling the same way, that our employees are feeling the same way, and that trickles down into their families, and so on and so forth. And then sadness, getting ourselves into a state of depression because of the external factors that are happening, whether personally or professionally, that motivates us to seek change. We did a survey I think we did this for the Small Business Council. We also did it for the Women's Business Council, and thinking through, and Brad was just talking about the Great Resignation. And so that was something that, is really interesting, in seeing how many people have thought about making a change or are thinking about doing so. And then discuss, that might motivate us to get rid of things and make plans to overcome it. So you want to frame messages accordingly as a brand, changing the general frame or tone to be more uplifting and to be purpose-driven, going back to being intentional. That's super important. And you want to target your messages to particular customer segments. So that's really important as well. Not every single message goes to, every single person in your target audience. So you do want to make sure that you are segmenting it and you're targeting it to, whichever group that makes sense to speak to. Next slide. So this is from McKinsey & Company, how leaders can engage employees during a return to work. There's been obviously so much around this, but thinking through that as we started talking through returning to work, and then we kind of pulled back on that. Same with events and other things that were in person. And then we kind of pulled back on that, but then maybe we're going to start returning to that. We're already into the fall, but thinking through, what the holidays might look like into spring of next year. So organizations were segmented into first, survivors, so those struggling to stay in business. So a communications example here would be, stressing the long history of the organization and how it's weathered storms before. So how can we, from that perspective, how can we retain our purpose in a changed world? And then adapters, those having to radically change their business models. Communications example there would be stressing the ways the organization has reinvented itself in the past. So how do we move quickly to new ways of working? And then thrivers, they're well positioned because of the demand of, and are already working remotely, stressing ways that current success is built on long-term values. How do we maintain our current success as the world returns to, quote, normal? So, a lot of tech companies and things like that, kind of adjusting their strategy as well, and becoming more, thinking through, the FedExes of the world, but thinking through, other companies here locally that may not be, huge enterprises, and that did fare well in the pandemic. Well, how do we make sure that we can maintain that and still continue to grow as the world changes? Next slide. And then finally, listening in the next normal. Okay, so there was a great Harvard Business Review article that came out, and it said, from what great listeners actually do, and we'll send this out right after this is over, but levels 1, 2, and 3. So the first, level 1, the listener creates a safe environment in which difficult, complex, or emotional issues can be discussed. Then level 2, the listener clears away distractions like phones, laptops, focusing attention on the other person and making appropriate eye contact. And then level 3, the listener seeks to understand the substance of what the other person is saying. Level 4, the listener observes nonverbal cues. So consider the unmasking idea that was mentioned earlier. If we can't see the person, we can gauge those cues by reading in between the lines of their voice, their email, their text response, or other form of communication. You want to ask questions, ensure the other participant feels satisfied and secure. Level 5, the listener increasingly understands the other person's emotions and feelings about a topic, identifies, acknowledges, and validates them. And then level 6, the listener asks questions that clarify the assumptions the other person holds and helps the other person to see the issue in a new light. Next slide. So thinking through our advantages from a small business perspective, typically people trust small businesses. They're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our family. We want to support them. They know Memphis better than anyone, and we want to support them as well. They want to support us and we want to support them. But it was really interesting in reviewing, and I'll send this out as well when we get off or when I'm done speaking, but the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is something that from a communication standpoint, Edelman puts this out every year. And last year, I think they put out 2, so I would imagine they'll put out another one fairly soon. But last year, people largely rallied behind companies, governments, et cetera, trusting that they would do the right thing. But the trust index in the US overall declined by 5 between this year and last, which is a substantial number considering what it was in previous years before that. And actually from a worldwide perspective, it actually decreased 18 points. So that's pretty substantial. What does this mean for small and local businesses? People look to businesses and their brands for confidence, for reassurance, and for information. So you want to make sure that this is what you're putting out there. We want to make sure that we are pushing out a message of confidence, that we are pushing out information that is relevant. So that goes through thinking through our different audience segments and target audiences, and also reassuring them that they are, that maybe not everything's going to be fine, but that things will be okay. But here's the information that we're putting out. We're going to reassure you that we're okay, and here's the information that we're going to push out for that. And then the Kearney Consumer Institute study showed that small businesses easily, well, maybe not easily beat large companies, but in the area like from a quality and customer service perspective, at least, because there was so much more two-way communication. So I think we've got an advantage when it comes to being a small business and ensuring that we continue to let our customers know that we're there for them and showing them, what it truly means to be a service and purpose-driven company. So quick recap. Next slide. So don't wing it. Be proactive in your communication. Get your leadership team together, make a plan, and stay the course. Listen to feedback, both internally from your team and externally from your customers, your clients, any stakeholder that you have. Create strategic plans through the lens of your core values and with feedback in mind, and you can adapt in a brand appropriate way. Remain flexible. We've heard flexibility, we've heard pivot, we've heard, the fact that, this is a state of continued disruption. So remain flexible. Stay true to the voice of your brand, particularly in operational and sales conversations, to keep communicating in ways that are thoughtful, responsible, relevant, and genuine. Execute without hesitation. You must understand that implementing your strategy is only the beginning. You go in with confidence, or if you go in with confidence, adjust your strategy where needed. We're in the new normal. Pivot is appropriate. Have resilience and embrace that resilience, and be authentic. It's not if, but when the next disruption is going to happen. So anticipate that and adapt for it. Learn from each experience and continuously incorporate feedback, and you'll be successful, especially from a communication standpoint. Don't wait for the next normal. Build it. We talk about that a lot in our small business council conversations, and in my business as well. So that is it from a communication standpoint. I'll turn it over to the next panelist.
All right, thanks, Beth. So I'm Mike Hoffmeyer, I'm the director of the Career Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Memphis. And entrepreneurship, you're going to see a lot of overlap in the themes between what all the other speakers said and what I'm going to outline in terms of the mindset we have to have. As business owners, the next normal is really forcing us to go back to our roots and to be more entrepreneurial, to act less as just operators and more as actual entrepreneurs and innovators. Next slide, please. So this image, I'm sure, evokes some of the emotions that you felt over the last 18 months, dealing with uncertainty, having to do whatever it takes to survive. For a lot of us that have been in business for a long time, these are unfamiliar feelings, cause a lot of stress and alarm. But as an entrepreneur, it's normal. It's what you're accustomed to. Think back to the days when you started your business. You remember what this felt like, and you were hungry, and survival drove you. And so we need to get back to some of those roots and really embrace that rather than fear it. We have to accept that some things just aren't going to be the same again, and we have to adapt. As Beth just mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a famous innovation quote, and I promise we actually did not coordinate these presentations. Some of the overlaps are completely coincidental, but there's a famous innovation quote that the best way to predict the future is to create it. As Beth said with the parting thought, don't wait for the new normal. Create it. Don't even predict it. Just create it. So, I mean, it can be really challenging to really adequately prepare for the future when we don't really know what it looks like. So we really have no choice but to be agile, to keep an eye on the horizon for both opportunities and storms, and even recognize as entrepreneurs and looking at the world through that entrepreneurial lens, that even those storms represent opportunities, and you have to leverage those. Sometimes we can't have the status quo kind of thinking. You have to be able to leverage the opportunities as they arrive. The only thing that's going to be constant in the next normal is change itself. And you've heard that repeatedly throughout these presentations. So a few of the things you can do, just some quick thoughts in terms of really starting to use that entrepreneurial mindset, is to really reflect on your business, on the pandemic, double down on your strengths or diversify to hedge your bets a little bit. Think about where you really excelled during the pandemic and why did you? Can you leverage that to further strengthen your business now as we move forward? Where were you really exposed during the pandemic? And do you need to diversify your products or your services in some way to reduce that liability and dependence on the status quo and what was normal? Really, I think the key here is a lot of ways you have to identify your comfort zone and realize when you're staying inside that because it's easy, and be able to stretch that comfort zone a little bit, or even better yet, jump out of it entirely. Experiment. Don't be afraid to fail. Just mitigate your risk and see what happens. But do what you have to do to help create that future and guide yourself and be proactive rather than reactive. Next slide, please. Another thing we have to do, and this one I can't emphasize enough, is recognize complacency. Complacency is death to a company. And when you're running startups, this is a no-brainer. But as your business matures and you have a healthy niche in the market, it's really easy to get comfortable with where you're at, and your innovation stops and you're not as hungry as you used to be, and the business just comes in and you don't really have to fight for it that much anymore. All this leads to a sense of complacency that's extraordinarily dangerous for a small business owner. And you have to look at a lot of different things, not just external elements of complacency, but internal as well. A lot of businesses are having employment struggles. Brad referenced a lot of these things. What can you do to innovate around employment to create a competitive advantage so that you don't have the same struggles with employees? It could be some of the concepts that he mentioned around agents, employee agency or leasing, but it's not, how do you drive that rather than react to what's just going to happen? And so being creative and innovating around how you do HR, how you employ human capital, looking at internally, is there a lack of innovation? Have you become too comfortable in your business, whether it's in your processes or whether it's in your product and service offerings? And how much future thinking are you doing? Are you just doing what we do every day? Or are you actively looking at the competitive landscape around you and the political and social environments and actively recognizing opportunities and capitalizing on those? Or are you relying on the same things that you've already done? So these are things we really have to recognize and understand. Externally, how regularly are you assessing your competition? How often are you looking specifically at growth opportunities? And even things like with trying to provide meaning for employees. What about social responsibility? They call it corporate social responsibility, but you don't have to be a large corporation to get involved in this. Could be as simple as giving back in your community or whatnot. But there's so many lenses you can look at this through. Just be aggressive in innovating and being creative, and never just being satisfied with what is. From a financial standpoint, it's always best practice to have a multi-month working reserve, and so cash flow is not an issue. And that's never more true than it is now. Do you need to revisit your business model to make this even more of a priority? Because I think the people like to keep a 3 to 6 month reserve. That wouldn't even have been enough for the pandemic, and none of us could have predicted that. So taking another look at how you manage your cash flow and how you organize your business from a financial standpoint bears some review. And I think as business owners, we have to focus on making a habit of being adaptable and resilient, not by necessity, but as a matter of being a business leader, and just having that as a fundamental part of your skill set, and manage and plan your business accordingly. I think you should always be able to answer the question, how do you stay hungry as a business owner or a business executive? Next slide, please. So, we have to really quickly be able to identify opportunities in a rapidly changing landscape. That's been the key to a lot of companies' successes in being able to weather the storms of the pandemic. A couple of examples locally, we had one company came out of the Cruise Center here and had some moderate growth, a little bit of capital investment from investors, but they were in an industry with a really slow sales cycle, so they were really struggling to grow at a rate rapid enough to continue investment. And then the pandemic hit, and they realized this platform they had built was a huge asset when it came to all the challenges that people were experiencing and having to go virtual. And they pivoted to a entirely different industry because that industry was at a standstill. We're talking about nonprofit space. And now the pandemic's been a huge boon for them because they made this pivot. They've raised another $1 million in capital, and they're growing like gangbusters just because they recognized an opportunity in the storm. A less technology-focused example is a local chemical company supplying chemical supplies for a very traditional business that was nearly destroyed by the pandemic. And of course, that trickled down the supply chain. But what they recognize is we have these assets and these skills, and there's a need in the market. Remember when hand sanitizer, you couldn't find that for 6 months? They started making barrels of that. And now they came out of the pandemic stronger than when they started, just because they recognized an opportunity and filled a need. So that's something I think that we can all learn lessons from. Next slide. So we need to regularly revisit our business model. Never is it a better time to do that than now. So many of us have did a business plan and it sits on a shelf collecting dust for 5 years, and you might go back and revisit it unless you're really, really disciplined. But for most of us, like in the startup space, we don't even do business plans anymore unless you need to borrow money from a bank. It's too monolithic. It's this exercise that has some value, but then it sits on a shelf, and a lot of folks don't actually manage to that. It's not very agile. It's not very nimble. So being able to review, how do we manage this company? What are our key performance indicators? How are we measuring what we do and making those plans? A really good agile methodology that's really, really quick to implement is an OKR methodology, which is objectives and key results. There's a really great book by John Doerr called Measure What Matters. If you're interested in taking a look, it's a really outstanding case study and how companies of all sizes have leveraged this so that their planning is quarterly and not every 5 years. And it's very much operating by short-term objectives and strategies and being able to measure those results and adapt your business regularly as a part of just how you manage the company and do business. I think we also need to pay more attention to contingency planning, and I'm not talking necessarily about disaster recovery. I think we all know that that is a prudent business thing to have in place. But what I'm talking about are things like developing and strengthening alternative channels, specifically for establishments that are dependent on a physical location of people walking in the door. Developing your online channels and your social media, not as an afterthought, but as a critical part of your business, so that if one of those channels is shut down or something catastrophic happens to it, you've still got the other leg standing and you're not dead on the water. Whether that's online or social media or telecommunications, whatever is relevant to your customers, really paying more attention to what those other channels are so that you're not overly dependent on one. And then obviously with supply chain issues and global dynamics and whatnot, never has it been so important to make sure that you're revisiting your business model and adapt if you need to. Who knows how long these supply chain issues are going to continue. Someone's eventually going to step in with a solution because they recognize it as an opportunity, but assuming that it's going to go back to normal, it's probably not the best course of action. All right, so next slide. And this will be my last one. This was mentioned in a couple of the other topics as well. And this is less about entrepreneurial mindset, more about strategic thinking and emotional intelligence in your business. More and more businesses are taking stances and making political statements or social stands, whether it's on vaccination requirements or mask mandates or social issues, social justice, or politics. Politics especially is so much more prominent in our customers, our target markets these days. And sometimes it's tempting to have an emotional response to that as a business. I think you really have to deliberately think about when you're going to do this, evaluating what your value propositions are for taking this stand, and what the potential consequences are, not just to you, but your staff, your company as a whole, and making a really informed decision before making an emotional decision around these kind of issues. And what that really requires is for you to know your customers, know your target market, and that's all about entrepreneurial mindset. So just in summary, we got to go back to our roots. We really have to stay hungry, have that focus on innovation, forward thinking, not be afraid to fail a little bit, within reason, of course, but by experimentation and seeing what's going to work, because waiting for it to go back to what was is certainly not certainly going to fail. So leverage your entrepreneur, develop that mindset more if you don't already have it, and that'll prepare you for an uncertain future.
Wow. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask all four of our panelists, if they will, to turn their cameras on. And Patricia, if it's okay with you, I'm going to kick off with a question for you all. There's so much to take in, but we got lots of questions to ask. Joe Cutrell, when you talk about technology, and I may be the only one on this phone call that still has a landline, I am hardwired to the world. But I'm not the only one out there. So what is the next normal for things like fixed wireless?
That's a good question. Thanks. And you can tell I was rushing through my leadoff topic by the fact that the AT&T guy didn't even say 5G, right? So the answer here certainly is to move toward more of a mobility type of connectivity, and that could be just for your normal collaborative communications, your voice calls, those kinds of things, or messaging, but also for fixed wireless. We have a lot of primary cellular, primary wireless connections for things like pop-ups or mobile, trucks, food trucks, Winnebagos that go out into the underserved area for healthcare, those kinds of things, or also cellular for backup. If you have fiber coming in, it can be bundled no matter who you get your fiber from, if it's AT&T or not. You can work with them to make sure that there's a mobile backup for that. And as Mike mentions, you have to develop these alternate channels, and not only for communication with your employees or your customers, but also for those critical business process. Those alternate channels could very well be mobility if we're talking about getting that data in there, so that you're not overly dependent, as he says, on one path. In some cases, that mobile connection may be a tablet. Maybe you have a Square card reader in a tablet for when your cash registers go down. I was in the store the other day and they couldn't check people out. We left carts full of food right there, and everybody had to leave because they didn't have an alternate way to do an important function on their business. So that mobile connection is something that will not only bring collaboration and connectivity to the people, but also to the processes and to the stuff.
Thank you. Brandon, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to kind of jump around here. You brought up leased employees. Now, having been in the placement business for as long as I have, there was the old leased employees, and I don't think that's what you're talking about, where a company would turn all of its employees over to an employee leasing company. You're talking about the new leased employees where the gig employee or the individual leases themselves out. Is that what you mean?
I am talking about that, and I'm also talking about organizations that are going to be specialized staffing companies that will lease people out for projects. So it won't necessarily be we're going to recruit and place somebody for a job. That will happen, but you're seeing it in nursing. One of the things that hospitals are doing is they're using freelance nurses through agencies that are making them available all over the country. Now, it's created real problems because they get paid higher rates. They control how much they work. They've got this kind of ability to manage things, but they don't have stability in the sense that they're going to be in one place working for one company. That's frustrated nurses in hospitals because their hours are crap. Their pay is less and they're burning out. And so that's actually fostering more nurses to quit and go to these agencies and say, I want to be freelance, right? And so you're going to start seeing things like that, but you're also going to start seeing people placed for 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years, themselves and through agencies that are going to foster collecting talent and saying, you need people to do this, we've got them. And so you're going to see the shift in the way hiring is done and what an employee really looks like. I think that's a profound difference going forward. So
my next question is going to be a crossover between Joe and Beth. Kind of cute. So Joe, you talk about technology driving the way things are going to happen. But then I've got employees who go, but I want to have this and I want to have this and I want to have this. So somehow or another, the communication and employees being able to comfortably communicate to management and management listening to them on their needs for an investment in communication or this new technology. Joe first, then Beth, please.
Yeah, I think that comes from a desire for the business to continue to operate, right? And one of the ways that we can have this business continuity is to make sure that the technology that's put in is not clumsy like it was last year. And there is definitely a move to something that's more neat and more elegant. And the way to get there is to ask your technology partners not to help solve your technical questions. Don't ask them for a circuit that's this size or that goes from here to here. Ask your technology partners to help you solve for your business requirements. And then the employees will feel better about having a business that does operate even when the cash registers go down, or where they can have a group meeting with no agenda, where they just get to say hi and have water cooler talks via remote technologies, if that's something that they want to be able to do. But as Beth says, don't wing it, right? You've got these competing requirements where you want to have connected processes, but you also have the fear of what if it doesn't work right? What are the security implications? But so don't wing it for sure. Beth?
So from a communication standpoint, if there's something that you need, ask your employees, is this going to make you more effective in your job? Is this going to help to impact your job in some way that will ultimately help impact and improve the bottom line on our end. And if that's the case, then I feel like it's a no-brainer. So if this can make you more productive as an employee, that will in turn make us more productive for our clients and for our customers, then it's definitely a no-brainer. So make sure from an employee standpoint, make sure you come, with that information, and from an employer standpoint, ask that type of question. How can that, help me help you? And that, that communication always goes a long way.
Hey, Dottie, I have this question for Beth, if you don't mind. So with every industry, more specifically, every company has its own writing style and etiquette. When it comes to emails and other company materials and communication, how should leaders go about aligning their new hires' communication with the companies?
So I think you're, talking about, email etiquette, in that way. So, every industry, and more specifically, every company has its own writing style or etiquette when it comes to emails and other, company materials and communication. And, when it comes to having, a lot of employees, bringing those, so if a leader has a lot of new employees and they feel like they're going to continue to bring in, several employees from other industries, that it's about, understanding, knowing and understanding sensitivities, especially during a time of prolonged disruption. So, I think, ensuring that you're aligned on, communication styles. Like, so from my perspective, we have what we call an account executive, or just a general employee overview. And we go through and talk about, okay, this is kind of, how we typically communicate with employees. This is how we like to, communicate with our customers, with our clients. And we kind of go through email etiquette. We go through, okay, typical writing style. You can have them go through a quick writing session with someone who's been there for a long time. Have them sit and shadow someone on your team to talk through, different scenarios, how to respond to an email, how, give them in the hiring and interview process. That can be one of the tests. How would you respond to this? How would you draft an email about so-and-so? How would you draft if it's in communications, how would you draft a press release about this?
Thanks. Beth, real quickly, because I'm going to come back to you for something else, but Mike Hoffmeyer, entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship to all of us, or to many, means startup of new businesses. What's happened to new businesses coming into the world in this last 18 months? Have you seen a rise? Did it come to a screeching halt? What's happened with entrepreneurs?
For inexperienced entrepreneurs, we've certainly seen a reduction, right? Fear of the uncertainty, the need to be financially stable has really curtailed that. But for experienced entrepreneurs, we've seen a surge, because with uncertainty comes opportunity, right? I mean, entrepreneurs are naturally geared to look at problems not as obstacles, but as opportunities. And how do we leverage that? So you've seen all kinds of interesting things pop up as a result of the pandemic and the political unrest and all the things that we're seeing. So it's, it depends on the stage and experience of the entrepreneur, but the ones that are definitely experienced it's a new frontier.
Thank you. Most of you know that last year we did a series on small business resiliency that we called our Prosper series. And we promised at the end of that, and Brad, you brought this up in your notes, we know that pandemics are coming. We know we're going to have another ice storm. We know we're going to have another windstorm. We know we're going to have another flood. And we promised our small businesses that we would help them have a playbook for not if, but when the next one happens, to help us all be better prepared. Beth Wilson, can you please speak to our launch coming soon?
I will. So as Dottie said, the past year has been defined by disruption and transformation. Some businesses thrived, some struggled, but everyone has something that they wish their business had done differently. So the Greater Memphis Chamber's forthcoming Small Business Resiliency Playbook, as we're calling it, is the culmination of more than a year of research, roundtable discussions with local businesses, and insights of experts. I am so excited to be with the Greater Memphis Chamber and launching the Small Business Resiliency, and we'll be doing that in the coming weeks. We'll be making some announcements about that, as well as the availability of the playbook, which is going to be a downloadable piece as well, which we're going to continue to add to for any business that wants it. So wherever you are in your journey, I guarantee you'll find at least one thing that can help you prosper through the next period of change or even lead it.
Thank you. Patricia, you want to close us out, my friend?
Well, thank you all so much. And we're so glad to have Beth helping us culminate all that information together. We're really excited about that. Thank you so much to our panelists with all of this wonderful information. Thank you for attending, and stay tuned for your calendar. Go ahead and register for the Next in Marketing, which is on the 21st of October. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next time, and stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.